All right, welcome everyone to the Small World podcast. Excited to be back. My guest today is Rishab. He is the founder of Bond Health. Super interesting guy. He has education both at Berkeley and currently studying at Harvard Medical School. So you know he's incredibly smart. We also know him as one of the founders at UC Launch. So I'd say he's definitely one of the guys on top of the class. It's been really excited to watch him grow, and it's going to be really exciting to see where he goes forward. As a human, absolutely one of the nicest guys I've met. Always fun to be around, always smiling, and always genuinely happy. So, thank you, Rishab, for joining the podcast. Could you please tell me a little bit about Bond Health?
Yeah, of course. And awesome to be here. Thank you for the introduction as well. Really kind words. But yeah, Bond Health, we're basically trying to improve patient recruitment for clinical trials. And the way in which we do it is that we go through electronic health records, which has a lot of unstructured data. And we try to use our proprietary large language models to go through all of that data, analyze it, and identify the right patients that match the specific inclusion and exclusion criteria of clinical trials.
Awesome. And I'm excited to get more into how that works exactly. But before we do that, let's take a step back. Let's talk about how Bond Health actually came about. Was it you who had the idea? Was it one of your co founders? And then how did it become a real business?
Yeah, so the real motivation behind Bond Health was that, I was at a biotech startup and they were building a drug for a rare and inflammatory disease. And it's a disease that has no FDA approved treatment so far, and it has a high mortality rate. So it's really sad that people are not being able to survive because of that disease. It's an acute disease, right? And this was the closest thing to an actual treatment for this disease. And it was in phase 2 of clinical trials, and they had to find multiple patients. And with them, they started on that journey around 2021. And over 4 years, it was really, really hard for them to find patients. And they covered maybe 10% of that patient recruitment that they had initially sought out to get. Right. And that's when I realized how acute of a problem it really is to find patients for clinical trials. It could be so hard, even when the drug has shown efficacy in animal studies and has passed phase 1, right? So I did some digging into it, and I realized that it's not just this company. 33% of clinical trials fail just because they can't find enough patients, which is honestly a very shocking number. And this isn't clinical trials aren't going anywhere, right? You always need to test drugs on patients in order to get them to the market. So that challenge is only going to get greater and greater over time. So it needs a solution. And this is the closest thing to a solution that we could work on, which is why I started on Bond Health to dramatically improve how patients are recruited for clinical trials. And, at Harvard, I found my co-founders and one of my co-founders from MIT as well, but would love to dig into that a bit deeper, as we go forward with this podcast.
Absolutely. But for the VCs listening, I'm sure they're getting a boner right now hearing MIT and Harvard and Berkeley and everything. It's ringing, it's checking all the boxes. It's really interesting. Like every time I talk to a founder who's in the med space, it always shocks me just how incompetent a lot of like hospitals and like pharmacies are at just like their process optimization. So I'm really glad to see that someone like yourself is looking to make that better. And to share a bit of a personal story as well, like I have a family member who's suffering from a pretty rare cancer. And unfortunately, she beat it. It came back, and there was a test drug that she got put on. Had she been put on a month earlier, it would have been a lot more likely that it worked. But it just happened to be a like, someone who knows someone type of thing. Like the doctor knew someone who was doing these trials for the drug. And that seemed to be incredibly inefficient, right? So I guess to structure my next question, what I want to know exactly is when it comes to the way that you approach health clinics, pharmacies, everything like that, like how are you pitching yourself to the companies and how are you telling them about the value that you're bringing?
Yeah, sure. So I think like what you talked about is something that's really important to me as well, right? A lot of patients who really need these kinds of therapies and they just never get surfaced onto those patients that could be recruited for clinical trials. And that's really the aim, is to surface those patients to the pharma companies that are actually finding these kinds of patients, right? And really the way in which we think about it is there are three main customer segments. So the first is the pharma companies. Those are the ones that are actually developing the drugs and need to find the patients. The second customer segment is the CROs. These are clinical research organizations. And a lot of times, these medium sized or small sized pharma companies outsource the work of patient recruitment to these CROs, and not just one, multiple CROs. And CROs are connected to these sites, which are basically hospital systems or private clinics or, or smaller hospitals where patients come in to get their treatment, but can also go through clinical trials where they're given a drug and they come for all of their visits of that clinical trial. Sometimes pharma companies work directly with these sites. So essentially, we are selling to initially these CROs and pharma companies that really whose onus is to find those patients, right? And they are working directly with the sites, and they usually give the sites a lot of these technology tools to work with, which would improve their efficiency and help them find patients and work with those patients. But the really important thing to know about what we're doing is that this benefits every stakeholder. Like pharma companies love it because they're finding patients. CROs love it because they're finding patients. Hospital systems love it because they're getting revenue for the patients that they run the clinical trials on. Patients love it because they're getting the drugs that they could not get otherwise. And insurance companies love it because now patients don't need to go through those expensively, horribly expensive, treatments to probably still not get the right, to still not get the right treatment. Yeah, I think it's a win-win situation for almost every stakeholder in the process, which is great.
Can we talk about the last thing you said? Because I want to zone in just a little more on the headache that insurance companies have where someone gets a treatment, it's really expensive, but it
Mm.
doesn't go anywhere. Can you just talk a little bit more about how that works and like what you've seen working in the med space?
Yeah, so the truth is that insurance companies, they have to pay for everything, right? If a patient is insured, they have to pay for all kinds of treatments that the patient goes through. And for insurance companies, it's in their best interest to have to pay the least amount. And that would probably mean that they would hope that the patients don't have to get a lot of treatments, right? Because imagine you're paying your premium to them, and all they want is that they don't need to keep paying for your treatments while you're paying their premium. Their hope is that, you're healthy, you have no issues, so that premium goes straight into their pockets. And there are many times when you have to though get some sort of treatment. Let's say you have a disease that is more severe, doesn't really have a cure that's widely known, right? Then you try multiple different kinds of treatments. You go to multiple different doctors, and for each of these visits, each of these treatments, the insurance companies are paying for it, and they would rather not, right? They would rather have the right treatment so that they could pay for it once and it's done, and you're healthy. They're happy.
Yeah. And I think you undersold this a little bit. The fact that you can actually match treatments better for the pharma company as well, right? It's like you're saving them time in finding like the perfect patient rather than someone who might match it. And you're doing this automatically rather than manually. So I'm a huge fan of the company, by the way. So excuse the glaze a little bit, but we're going from there. I want to talk about moving forward, where you're at now. So you're killing it at UC Launch right now. That's our accelerator for UC backed startups, University of California backed startups. But I want to talk about where do you see Bond Health in a year? So I know you're having some pilots run right now. What's the goal for, let's say, the end of 2026?
Yeah. So the aim is really to prove our ROI in the real world. And the way in which we prove our ROI is through very clear success metrics. So in this space, there's some success metrics that matter a lot to the stakeholders. For example, one of the most important ones is what is the pre-screen failure rate? So out of all the patients that you end up talking to screen them, how many of them are actually eligible for that trial? And you want that to be, you want the pre-screen failure rate to be really low because you want everyone that's coming in that you've identified to be someone who most likely matches all the criteria that you're looking for. So you don't have to waste more time trying to find more patients, right? Today, the pre-screen failure rate is close to 90 to 95%, which is incredibly high. And that means it's really inefficient, right? And our aim is to bring that down by at least 50%. So that's the first kind of ROI that we want to see in the real world. And we want to have that as a case study with not just one pilot, but with multiple pilots in different parts of the United States. Then the second most important thing, and this is directly what matters, the number of patients that are enrolled. And this can be done in, different time frames. For example, in 1 month, how many patients were enrolled compared to without our technology versus with our technology. So let's say is it 1 versus 3, so that's so you've increased it 3x, right? Or then you could also look at the time frame of 3 months. Was it, in 3 months, were they able to recruit 3 patients and were you able to recruit 10 patients instead? So that's what we'd be looking at as the next most important factor. And then lastly, they have their own metrics for determining how much cost has been saved over the months of using your technology. So having that as another important metric is also really valuable because for them at the end of the day, they want the right ROI. Like everyone's incentivized by the cash that they can get and the cash that they can save. So that's really, an important metric for us as well. So those are the three main things. And ideally, by the end of the year, we could have enough we could have several pilots, at least around 10 customers, to really show that this is working in the real world. People are loving it and people want more of it.
Yeah, and you're being modest a little bit, like, you already have pilots going, right?
Yeah, we have a couple pilots going, some with really big hospital systems and a couple other smaller biotech companies as well. So we have them going on right now and hope to really, have that ROI out soon so we could present that to the rest of the world and show how well this is working.
Hell yeah, and as soon as you can show that you are giving a return on investment, boom,
Mhm.
we go from there, right? Then every hospital wants it, and it's a FOMO type of thing. I wanna ask about how you get paid.
Yeah, so essentially, the way in which this works, this is based on a lot of conversations that we've had as well. So what we are called in this entire world is we are called vendors. So we are vendors to all of these different stakeholders, right? So a vendor that is like ours usually gets paid in the form of an annual platform fee.
Mhm.
So it's almost like, you pay, let's say, 50 to 100K per year for a platform like ours, and based on that, you just help them, and that number is based on the number of trials that current organization is holding, or how many trials they want you to do, how many patients they have in their database. So it depends a bit on that, but usually it ranges between 550K to 100K. And then for much larger enterprise, like if you're working with a huge CRO, that could obviously be a much larger contract size, like somewhere in the range of 500K to 1 million, depending on how big that organization is.
Got you. And do you think that that's, like, the best approach to it? Have you explored any other ones? Because, like, my initial thought was, I mean, what if there's just a flat fee and then, like, per search or something like that? Like, is there a way to squeeze more money out, or is that just not a good way to do it?
I feel like that is a potential way to do it, but having an annual platform fee makes it easier for the hospitals to have it as, because at the end of the day, they get their budget from the CROs or the pharma companies. So if
Mm,
you have an annual fee, it's just one line item on that budget, and it makes it much easier for them to ask for that extra money. So it's more likely that you would have that money in your pocket at the end of the day. So that just makes it a bit more, I guess, consistent, and it's easier for them to explain that cost to any other stakeholder. So that's one. And then secondly, maybe you could think about it in the form of milestones. Like in their best interest, they would love to have it milestone based, right? Like if I only pay you for the number of patients you find, like that would be the best thing for them,
mm.
right? Why not? But of course, at that point, like we also need to set our boundaries, because there are a lot of operational costs to actually integrating into a healthcare system and then running those large searches. So that's why the annual fee is important for our side as well. So that's really why, like on both ends, it seems to be the best option, the best compromise, I guess.
No, that makes perfect sense, actually, now you think about it. Like, fixed cost is so much easier to, like, work around. What is your, like, CAC, customer acquisition cost?
Yeah. So I think that question depends a bit. It depends on what kinds of customers you're working with. If it's a really large organization, you could have a really long sales cycle, and it could take a lot of time to actually bring that customer on board. And sometimes that could range to about, like, I would say like 5% of the actual contract value, right? But at the end of the day, the most important thing is that in this industry, especially in clinical trials last for a really long time. So it's like 6 to 7 years, right?
Mm.
So these kinds of products are very sticky. So the lifetime value, if you think of the CAC to LTV ratio, the lifetime value is just so high because it goes on for 6 to 7 years and it's an annual contract, that at that point, the LTV is definitely going to would be definitely much larger than that CAC that you're spending. And it's going to be a really low ratio out there. So that's really what we care about. And the LTV is what matters at the end of the day.
I love that answer so much. That makes me so happy. I want to ask two more questions and then we'll wrap it up. The first question is more just out of curiosity. How come hospitals just don't have their shit together, like, all over the place? Like, they're probably, like, the worst organized, like, huge billion-trillion-dollar industry.
Yeah, I think that it's because, there's so many regulations around actually doing things. Everything is a huge burden. And usually the people in these organizations are, mostly PhDs who are in the field of science and natural sciences or medicine, and it's not really technologists that lead this industry. And that's, I think, why you're seeing this slowdown. But over time, there's been a slight change in the industry where a lot of these important technical things are being outsourced. So, like for example, adopting AI, a lot of these AI companies are being outsourced by these hospitals. They're not trying to build them in-house, and I think that's helping. If you look at, statistics about which industries have adopted AI the fastest over the past couple years, healthcare is leading amongst the industries. So that's actually a great sign. And it's also, I mean, in a way, it's also validation for us that this is a great space to be in right now and like boost ahead in right now before it's too late. But yeah, I think that they're doing a good job currently in the AI space, trying to really adopt things. But I think the reason why they have a lot of these legacy tools is because one, there's just not a huge presence of technical people in the space. And then secondly, it's just like it's very cumbersome in terms of regulations and things like that to make any changes in the organization.
That makes perfect sense, and I love to hear that you're also hopping on the accelerating bandwagon. Last question here. In a perfect world, 10 years from now, where's Bond Health?
So in a perfect world, we are the default global organization that any hospital system, any CRO, any pharma company has to use to recruit patients. It's almost like, okay, if you're building a new hospital and you are starting recruiting, or if you have a hospital and you're trying to recruit patients, the first software you have to get is Bond Health. It has to be there. Like the Bond platform just has to be with you. You have to be having the API and you have to pay for their cost. It's almost like it's part of your costs. Like it's just going to be part of it. And that's really what we see as a vision. And that's because we hope, and I really don't see how it could be different. Today, the way in which a lot of it works is there's a human being literally going through all of the patient records and like imagine tons of unstructured data and a human being going through all that data trying to match with the clinical trials inclusion exclusion criteria and doing that for 1,000 patients. It just won't be the case in 10 years from now. In 10 years from now, the only future I can see is where LLMs are going through this kind of data and automating that matching process, right? So, that just seems like the future. It has to be. So it's better if, we start working on it sooner than later.
Makes sense. And whoever starts first can train their LLM to be the best, and there's your moat.
Right, exactly. And the more hospital systems you work with, the more reinforcement learning you get, the better and better your models get. That's
Yep.
right.
Love it. Okay, well, that's pretty much all the time we have for today. I had a great talk. I had a great time, I should say, and a great talk. Thank you so much for joining, Rishab. I can't wait to see where Bond Health takes us and wishing you all the best in the future.
Thank you so much for having me. That was so much fun.